Back in the days of monopolies, it was possible for robber barons to buy out entire towns on the Gold Coast, demolish every house and building, and replace them with their own mega mansion. Hi everyone, Ken here. This is the story of Ormston House. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. In 1864, John Edward Aldred began life far from the world of mansions and millionaires. He was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts, a textile mill town, and by age 15, he was already working in the local mills. However, young John had bigger aspirations. Over the next few decades, through talent and tenacity, he climbed the ranks of industry to become a prominent business executive and financier. By the 1910s and 1920s, Aldred had made a name for himself in the burgeoning public utilities sector, which was the high-tech frontier of that era. He served as president of Baltimore's Consolidated Gas, Electric Light and Power Company and was a director of the United Railways and Electric Company in Maryland. His influence extended across state and even national borders. Aldred was at one point the president or top executive of an astonishing 37 different utility companies and amassed an estimated personal fortune of over $80 million. A key part of his success came from pioneering hydroelectric power ventures. He helped develop a massive power project at Shawinigan Falls in Canada, harnessing water power for electricity on a grand scale. He also led a $50 million investment syndicate to establish utility companies in Europe, notably in northern Italy. He even dabbled outside the utility world. Remarkably, Aldred served as chairman of the Gillette Safety Razor Company in the late 1920s, showing the breadth of his business interest. With great success came the means to live lavishly, and so, like many Gilded Age tycoons, John set out to build a country estate that would reflect his wealth and personal taste. The story of Ormston House begins around 1910, when Aldred and a close friend, lawyer William T. Guthrie, decided to establish grand homes on Long Island's North Shore. In an audacious move, Aldred, Guthrie, and a few other wealthy associates, including figures like Henry P. Davison and George F. Baker, essentially bought out nearly the entire hamlet of Lattingtown, New York. The group purchased about 400 acres of land and in the process demolished some 60 existing houses and buildings to clear the way for their estates. Aldred later quipped, "Mr. Guthrie and I destroyed the village of Lattingtown to get the view we wanted," a remark that became part of local folklore. It may sound ruthless, but such was the determination of these millionaires to craft their own private domains by the sea. On Aldred's portion of the land, perched near Long Island Sound, construction of his estate began in earnest a few years later. He named it Ormston, reportedly a family name important to him, giving the estate a personal touch. Work on the mansion started around 1916, and Aldred spared no expense in creating his version of paradise. For the design of the main house, he commissioned architect Bertram G. Goodhue. Goodhue was celebrated for his Gothic Revival designs. He co-designed St. Bartholomew's Church in New York City and other landmarks, and had recently branched out on his own to take on independent projects. At Ormston, Goodhue turned to the Tudor Revival style, drawing inspiration from the grand manor houses of Elizabethan England. The result was a sprawling, 74-room mansion built of solid stone and timber that evoked the feel of an old-world country house with modern American luxuries. The architecture of Ormston House is rich with period details. The structure was constructed of random coarse, quarry-faced limestone and topped with a heavy slate roof, lending it a sense of permanence and grandeur. Goodhue's design was not a strict copy of any one historic building, but rather a free Tudor interpretation, asymmetrical and bristling with character. The facade features numerous gables and about a dozen chimneys of different shapes. One especially striking element is the ornamented central entrance bay on the front facade, set in pale buff limestone that contrasts with the brown-gray stone of the main house. This entrance bay has a grand arched doorway embellished with Gothic carvings, above which a three-sided oriel window protrudes, complete with medieval-style tracery and decorative strapwork flourishes. Symmetrical twin staircases sweep up to a landing in front of the main entrance, creating a dramatic processional approach for guests arriving at the house. Inside, Ormston House was equally extravagant. Aldred wanted a home fit for entertaining dignitaries and friends, and the interior amenities reflected that. Visitors stepped into a large entry hall with a flagstone floor and dark wood paneling, which led into a soaring great hall nearly 2 stories high. The great hall was modeled after those in English manners. Its walls were lined with tall oak wainscoting and capped with blank masonry above, and sunlight poured in from full-length leaded windows. At one end of this hall stood a massive carved limestone fireplace and an elaborate walnut organ screen above. Yes, Aldred even installed a pipe organ in his home. Music would have filled the hall during grand parties, with the organ's pipes hidden behind Gothic-style wooden tracery. Adjoining the great hall was a more intimate morning room and a formal dining room, which boasted rich walnut paneling and a pattern-plastered ceiling decorated with Tudor rose and strapwork motifs in the English Renaissance style. In 1922, Aldred brought in architect Henry W. Rowe to make some updates, including alterations to woodwork in a few rooms. Rowe also designed some of the outbuildings, such as the stable and a gate cottage, helping to harmonize the entire property's design. Speaking of outbuildings, Ormston House was not just a single mansion, but practically a self-sufficient village of its own. Scattered around the 100-plus acre grounds were numerous support structures, all constructed in a complementary Tudor vernacular style. There were 2 gatehouses, one at each main entrance, built of fieldstone and half timbering, each looking like a charming English country cottage in its own right. A large stable and carriage house complex provided shelter for horses and vehicles, featuring steep gabled dormers and tall brick chimneys poking out of its tiled roof. A greenhouse and attached potting shed allowed for year-round cultivation of exotic plants, built with brick half-timber walls and a glasshouse wing. There was also a henhouse for fresh eggs, a dairy farm building, garages for newfangled motor cars with space for 4 autos, quite impressive for the 1910s, and various sheds and utility structures, even a picturesque well house, all styled to match the estate's Tudor theme. Perhaps most enchanting, a gazebo with a copper dome supported by classical columns stood on the lawn, offering a spot to enjoy breezes off the Sound. In total, Aldred's estate had all the amenities one could expect of a country gentleman's seat, and then some. Yet the crowning glory of Ormston may well have been its landscape and gardens. John Aldred was very particular about the grounds. He wanted them laid out like an English parkland to remind him of a grand old estate in the countryside of Britain. For this, he hired the Olmsted brothers, the famed landscape architecture firm founded by the sons of Frederick Law Olmsted, designer of Central Park. From 1912 to 1918, the Olmsted brothers carefully shaped the 112-acre property into a series of formal gardens, recreational facilities, and naturalistic areas. Immediately around the mansion, they created formal walled gardens inspired by 17th century English designs. A central rectangular garden greeted visitors in the forecourt, introduced by a vine-covered pergola and bordered by manicured hedges. In the middle stood an elegant fountain splashing water into a stone basin, an eye-catching centerpiece amid beds of flowering plants. Nearby were curated spaces like a rose garden, a lilac walk, and even an Elizabethan-style topiary garden dotted with statues, reportedly supervised by Mrs. Aldred herself. It was said that over $200,000 was spent on the landscaping alone, including importing the first cedars of Lebanon ever planted on Long Island, a truly exotic touch at the time. Further from the house, the estate had more leisurely pursuits laid out. Aldred's plan, as documented by the Olmsteds, included 2 tennis courts placed just beyond a stand of oak trees and connected by a broad green lawn that stretched towards the woods. A covered bathhouse was built by the beach so that the family and guests could enjoy swimming in the Sound with privacy and comfort. Long grassy alleys and winding paths threaded through the property, blending formal gardens into the more natural woodlands at the edges. To ensure complete privacy, Aldred even built a 10-foot-high stone wall around most of the perimeter of his estate, with sturdy wrought iron gates at the entrances. Ormston was designed to be a world unto itself, a place where John Aldred could live out his vision of genteel country life, entertain high society, and survey his domain by the sea. By around 1918, Ormston House was largely complete, and it stood as one of the most impressive of the Gold Coast mansions. The final price tag for the project was rumored to be nearly $3 million, the modern equivalent of around $64 million. While the house and gardens were the epitome of luxury, maintaining them was a massive undertaking. Aldred reportedly employed a household staff of around 60 people to keep everything running, from gardeners and grooms to maids and cooks. For over 2 decades, Ormston was a glittering scene of garden parties, family gatherings, and the day-to-day life of a millionaire's family. But the good times on the Gold Coast were not to last forever, and John Aldred's fortunes were about to change in a dramatic way. After the 1929 stock market crash and the ensuing Great Depression, many wealthy elites saw their financial empires shaken. Aldred initially still appeared to be riding high in the early 1930s. After all, he commissioned the Aldred Building, a landmark Art Deco skyscraper in Montreal in 1930. But several forces converged to undermine his holdings in the following years. One major blow was the onset of World War II, which devastated Aldred's overseas investments. The utility companies he had financed in Italy, for example, were essentially lost when war broke out in Europe in 1939. Closer to home, regulatory changes also unraveled Aldred's complex business network. New Deal-era legislation, such as the Federal Power Act and stricter antitrust regulations, targeted the kind of sprawling utility conglomerates that Aldred had built. These laws prohibited the kind of interlocking corporate directorships and monopolistic arrangements that allowed one tycoon to control dozens of utility companies. As a result, Aldred was forced to break up or relinquish control of many of his enterprises in the early 1940s. Aldred had poured a fortune into Ormston House, but by the 1940s it turned into a heavy financial burden. Faced with mounting debts and shrinking income, Aldred was left with no other option than to auction off his prized art collection and much of the mansion's opulent furnishings. Not long after, John Aldred could no longer afford to keep Ormston House at all, and he defaulted on the estate. In 1942, Aldred's beloved Ormston was put on the market, marking the end of an era. Stripped of most of its fine art and furnishing, the great house went dark. In 1944, the property was purchased at a foreclosure sale by the Basilian Fathers of St. Josephat, a Ukrainian Catholic monastic order. The Basilian monks renamed the site St. Josephat's Monastery, and thus a lavish Jazz Age estate quietly transitioned into a house of prayer. Today, the monastery continues to own the property and utilize the main house. Very few changes, if any, have been made to the public rooms, and the finishes appear mostly as they did in the days of John Aldred. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. What did you think about Ormston House? Let me know down below in the comments section. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.